Ready?
Mm-hmm.
So is this a major issue that I'm gonna ask you a different way. So is this a problem?
Is that your way of disguising that funny question? Is this a major problem? Yeah. Coming up, we look at the 2016 media pitch market.
Sir Martin Sorrell confronts the auditing community.
And McKinsey's go all digital. Hello and welcome to IDCOM's MediaSnack episode 33. Today we're going to take a look actually at the media agency pitch market. You'll recall last year was incredibly busy. So what's been going on this year?
Sir Martin Sorrell has become very vocal and challenged the media audit community with regards to conflicts of interest.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And finally, McKinsey have branded huge sections of their business as a digital business now, and clearly are coming after agencies' lunch like never before. All coming up on today's Media Snack in just the time it takes to eat a sandwich. Right, so first up today, we talk a lot about media agency pitches. We talked a lot last year about the MediaPalooza.
That's right.
MediaTsunami. What else was it called? Pitchmageddon or something, MediaMageddon. All these ridiculous names. That was crazy last year. We were anticipating that this would be quite busy in a different way.
Yeah, that's right. We're tier 2 brands kind of going to review. But I mean, last year at this time in the summer, going into July, we had Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, Coca-Cola and L'Oreal in the US.
Yeah.
Sony globally.
Yeah.
I mean, huge, massive global brands all reviewing.
Yeah.
Yet, going into the summer holiday season, if you like, this year, it's been incredibly quiet, right?
Yeah.
So, IKEA announced today that they have kind of concluded the first part of their review.
Yeah.
We understand that Diageo are getting relatively close to the conclusion of that process.
Yeah.
And I know that there's been one or two local and kind of regional reviews taking place, but nothing of the significance that we saw last year.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of pondering as to what that, why that might be.
Yeah. Because I mean, as we said, we were anticipating that it might be busy again with the second and third tier brands that would be rushing into the market to go and find their, improved position or secure the best talent or change the scope of their agency agreements after those really big brands had done so last year. But I think there's been some holding back.
Yeah.
It seems to be that some brands have held back. I think the biggest thing that's obviously affected the US market has been the publication of the ANA's investigation into financial management, media management, which I think for most US brands many US brands are members of the ANA. Yeah. They'll have been waiting just to see the outcome of that, which makes a lot of sense. As we've said before, in response to that report, we wouldn't be surprised if there is now a little bit of a run on agency pitches, and we anticipate US advertisers right now perhaps making preparations if they feel that they were going to pitch, if they were holding back, or if they feel it's appropriate or required for their business now, they'll be making preparations to probably launch those in Q4 typically.
That's right.
We find that those that we talked about, these are peaks and troughs in the pitch market, right? So we end up doing a lot of prep kind of February, March time for pitches for the spring and summer, and then it'll go a bit quieter.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, generally speaking, the kind of the pitch preparation takes place in spring and in autumn. And the agencies have to do, unfortunately, all of their work in the summer and Christmas periods when perhaps the advertising stakeholders are having a decent break. Yeah. This year has been slightly different, but we're anticipating that Q3 will be quite busy in terms of preparation, with those advertisers that have decided, for whatever reason, to consider their pitch launch dates, perhaps going into Q4.
Yeah.
I think from a UK and a perhaps European advertiser perspective, I think Brexit's had a big influence. I think those brands that were considering reviewing this year have decided to hold back on that decision until perhaps the clarity of the situation becomes a little bit better.
Yeah.
But we are anticipating that Q3 will be busy in terms of preparation, with those brands going live in Q4. So the agencies should be able to enjoy a relatively relaxed summer, but brace yourselves for a challenging Christmas.
Yeah, indeed. And for those brands that are thinking in that way, that are making preparations, and perhaps they've delayed their pitch, and maybe they're using the summer to make their preparations, what's changed? We often give advice, and we do advise obviously a lot of marketers about preparing and running media agency pitches. What's changed now, do you think? I mean, given the A&A guidelines have come out, given Brexit, does that change the mindset of a brand when it's pitching?
I'm not sure. I think it's placed the focus on key areas of the pitch toolkit, if you like. So the contract, they will all be looking at their master services agreement, so the framework with which they will engage with their agency partners of the future. So there will be huge diligence on making sure that the contract is right and updated. Scope of work, I think, will be an important part of any pitch preparation. Identifying the right remuneration structure by which to engage with any future media partners, I think, is going to be really important, because one of the accusations is that we've got ourselves in this mess because of poor practices when it comes to paying the agencies fairly and equitably. So I think that is going to be it. But I also think that defining a clear ambition for media, given that media is now so high in the corporate agenda, will be an important part of that preparation stage. Because if clients begin to understand truly what value media can bring to their business, then they are far better at being able to articulate the role that media agency can play in delivering against that ambition.
And that's going to be the clear difference. We saw this at the beginning of the 2009 recession. When we originally launched the business, there were, and the world economy was heading into recession, was probably in recession, I think, by that point. It's a great time to start a business, by the way, if you're ever thinking about that. Is that the majority of the market was heading down can we save money from our media costs, very cost focused, and we're launching media pitches really to create leverage on their agencies to negotiate down costs. Yeah. There may be some of that going on now, because there may be brands out there who are thinking, in economic uncertainty, let's use the opportunity to negotiate our prices down and save some money. Yeah. But we would advocate very strong. I think there's going to be less of those these days, and we'd advocate against solely that mindset. You can certainly find ways to reduce waste and improve efficiencies in media process, but a lot of that is the client's own behaviour. Yeah. It's not just delivered by negotiating agency costs down, which, as we've discussed before, is a very short-term fix, if it's a fix at all, because it pushes agencies into places where we've discussed a lot and the industry is discussing a lot. They perhaps become less transparent. The media being recommended is less effective to drive the business, and media ceases to be an investment in growth. But it's simply a cost that gets managed down and down in a race to the bottom.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, if anything, if the A&A report and the discussions around transparency have had any positive result, it has made it very clear to advertisers that there is a consequence of driving prices too low. Yeah. And I think that they are now going into these reviews, certainly the clients that we're talking to, appreciate that there has to be a balance between delivering and driving a competitive pricing point with maintaining quality.
Yeah, and in addition to that is embracing change and behaviour on the client side, to take a bit more control of the management of media, upskill themselves just get better at understanding how to work with an agency in more productive ways. And that's something that we're seeing a lot more clients finding that they want to go through this self-improvement process to be better clients, and they see that there's absolute value in doing so.
Next up, so Martin Sorrell has challenged ubiquity around conflict of interest.
Yeah.
So why is there a conflict of interest with regards to ubiquity?
Well, I mean, he's accusing them of a conflict of interest. I don't know whether we agree that there is necessarily a conflict of interest, but the important thing to understand, and he talks about media auditors. We talk a lot in this industry about media auditors, but the reality is there isn't such a thing actually as a media auditor. When people say the word media auditor, which is what Ubiquity would call themselves, what they mean is a company that can benchmark your pricing against somebody else's pricing and a pool of other clients' pricing. There's no actual audit work. There's no requirement for the people that are conducting that to be accountants, chartered accountants, have any kind of forensic financial skills really, other than being able to compare data sets.
But you need to be an expert in media, right? So you need to have had kind of TV trading experience.
It would help to understand more the nuance of how agencies work. I think makes a better media benchmarker. Let's call them media benchmarkers. But what Sorrell's saying is that there's potentially a conflict of interest between an Ubiquity type business, which is benchmarking costs and maybe run media pitches and things like that, and a business like Firm Decisions, which is a contract compliance auditor owned by Ubiquity. So this is his accusation, and there's a very clear difference in the work that they do. The contract compliance auditor, Firm Decisions, will go in and be given very privileged access with permission of the agency to go and look at their books to confirm that the agency are complying with their contractual obligations. But they'll have visibility of financial statements, and they'll sit with the FD or the CFO of the agency and get a lot of visibility in the business of that agency. So a very privileged peek into the agency's books. Martin Sorrell's accusation or suggestion is that there could be a conflict of interest there, because if one part of the business can go in and see the agency's books, they may be able to identify practices which in theory could be exploited by the company from if they manage media pitches, for example, because they would potentially have the ability to go to that same client and say, look at the mess in that agency, you should take your business for pitch, and that's good, profitable business for Ubiquity. So I think that's where he's saying that there was a conflict potentially.
Although from Ubiquity's perspective, you can see that they are complementary. So you have the media benchmarking, auditing piece, and the compliance piece. So if I'm a client and I want to have reassurance that my agency is delivering against the cost commitments that they promised in my review, I would use Ubiquity to make sure that. But also, I would want that same firm to go in and make sure that the agency are compliant with the contract that we've agreed. So they are complementary in terms of skill set. I mean, my challenge though, if I'm a client, especially if I use one of the Group M agencies and I use Ubiquity and Firm Decisions as my kind of three core key media partners, is that I don't want them fighting. I don't want them bickering because that does me no good whatsoever. What I want them doing is focusing on the key issues that I see as critical to my business. I want them working out ways of dealing with ad fraud and working out ways of negating ad blocking. So I don't want them infighting, taking each other to court. I want them working together, focusing on the key issues of my business. So is this story a big deal?
Not really, I don't think so. I think it's just an example of just this brewing tension, I think, between agencies and the auditors, as we discussed with reference to these same companies going to the High Court in the UK last week. I think the conflict of interest is a good question, but I think it's misguided or misaimed at the wrong, perhaps the wrong businesses. from a client perspective, I think where you may have concerns on conflict of interest is if you work with a consultant or an advisor or an auditor or any of the kind of what so-called independent, advisory companies, of which we are one. What you should be asking is, do they have any commercial relationship with the agencies that they are auditing or advising you about? Because in our experience, there's a whole raft of these auditors or agencies that offer and sell services and products and tools to the agency community. And that, if there's anywhere where there's conflict of interest, that is where there should be questions.
But then it comes down to disclosure.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm a client and I understand the commercial relationships that my auditing or consulting partner has with agencies, then that's fine.
Yeah.
I can appreciate and filter perhaps any advice they give me in that knowledge.
Yeah.
It is when there is lack of disclosure that perhaps would be an issue. Yeah. So it's all about understanding, I think, the commercial relationships that consulting companies have with all of their kind of vendor and agency community.
Yeah, great. Okay, so finally this week, McKinsey, the well-known global management consulting business, has launched a brand called Digital McKinsey.
Catchy name.
Yeah, it's clever. Which brings together all of their internal digital assets under this other internal brand. And I think the idea is that, as trusted advisors and consultants to some of the world's largest companies, the CEOs of those companies are really looking for guidance in digital transformation.
I think it's an interesting story, and on the back of a MediaSnack topic that we discussed a couple of weeks ago when we profiled the big four that had gone into digital in the big way. So Accenture Interactive, IBM Interactive, Deloitte Digital were just swallowing up massive amounts of digital revenue at the expense of the traditional agencies. And this is another example of a management consultant company, a massive management consultancy, coming in, seeing an opportunity within the digital space. It's got 2,100 people, I think, that it's brought together from all of their units that are going to be formed to create this kind of digital operation. And I would be worried if I was an agency. I mean, these guys, we talked about consulting privilege before, but these guys have deep-rooted, C-suite relationships with a lot of the big advertisers that work with the traditional holding companies. And these guys are going to go in there with a transformational message. The agencies are going to be squeezed further and further, I think, in this space. That would worry me.
And because they're, part of that service inevitably looks at digital marketing practice, and so they'll be advising on strategies for digital transformation of marketing, tools and vendors. They even provide their own digital agency services now. So I think that's where, perhaps we're at a point now where that may stunt the ambitions of the big agency groups who perhaps saw themselves, aspiring to be, transformation consultants and all this kind of stuff. I think it's clear that most agencies are a bit more further down the chain in terms of execution. And these big consulting companies now are firmly in that space of digital transformation of businesses.
So it's changing the whole kind of ecosystem, I think, and it's absolutely fascinating, but it's slightly worrying if you're one of the big traditional agencies.
Okay, that's all for this week. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.
Have a good weekend.